Coming up this week,
when we talk about manufacturing EV vehicles and warehouses, the inventory levels, the types of inventory, metal, water, other devices can have a noticeable impact on the Wi-Fi experience.
Well, hello, friends, and welcome to episode 188 of the EV Resource Podcast. I'm Zach Hurst, and each week I bring you the latest EV news, information, and interviews with industry experts. And this week I have a special guest, Roger Sands, CEO of Wyebot. Roger has a bachelor's and master's degrees in electrical and electronics engineering from Northeastern University and an MBA from Worcester Polytechnic Institute. Roger, welcome to the podcast. I know it's going to be a great conversation and one that is very interesting, I think, to a lot of people.
Yeah, good morning, Zach. It's a pleasure to be on your podcast, and I look forward to having a conversation.
Before we dive into really the bulk of what we're talking about, I want to give you a chance to just speak to your origin story, how you came to your current position as CEO of Wyebot.
Yeah, thanks, Zach. I've been in the networking technology space for 30 years, and I've been running high-tech business units for Fortune 500 companies as a general manager and for startups in a variety of executive positions. But what's interesting, Zach, is for the past 20 years, I've been in enterprise Wi-Fi networks and enterprise Wi-Fi business units. And so I've seen the explosion of IoT devices and the dynamic nature and the critical nature of enterprise Wi-Fi networks, the on-ramp to the internet, right? Cloud computing. So there's been some major transformational challenges in the networking space. And prior to Wyebot, I was a general manager at HP for 7 years, running their worldwide Wi-Fi business. And it was there when we realized, my co-founder and I, that there was a large pain point in the industry. And it had to do with intermittent, Wi-Fi performance issues. So the networks were becoming business mission critical, and we'll talk more about the EV space shortly. But it's becoming business critical. But unfortunately, because of the dynamic nature and complexities of Wi-Fi communication, even though it's an awesome technology, like I said, we've been in this space for 20 years, but at the same time, because of the complexities, the explosion, like I said, of IoT devices, personal devices, just the standards evolution, right? As we evolve the Wi-Fi standard, bringing higher speed, more security, at the same time, more complexity in the sense that the standards are very complex. So if you boil all that together, what was happening when I was running HP's business, working with enterprise companies all over the globe, they were having intermittent performance issues, right? Where everything was working fine for days and weeks, and then all of a sudden there's a disruption or connectivity or roaming. Most of us have felt it in our personal lives, or whether we're on a podcast like this or we're on a video collaboration call and you can have challenges. So that's when my co-founder and I realized that we need to build an automated solution, right? Leverage automation to stay on top of these dynamic Wi-Fi networks 24 by 7 and proactively identify performance issues, what's causing them, and how to solve them, right? So not just providing analytics and data, but actually working in real world situations, identifying the issues and identifying the solutions.
Sure. So, what is it that you all are doing in the EV space with EV charging or manufacturing? Let's tie that together so that we don't lose everybody before we continue with everything else.
Yeah, absolutely. So, if you think of the EV space, and we're working with some of the leading EV companies in the world, leveraging our solution on a daily basis. But what's happening is we're talking about complex dynamic manufacturing facilities. You referenced that,
Hmm?
right? And we're talking about EV vehicles that can communicate over Wi-Fi for software updates, firmware updates, communication with the cloud, etc. So when you look at that EV market segment, You have communication that can take place from the vehicle. You also have manufacturing facilities, whether it's the final assembly for the automobiles, whether it's the components that make up, the automobile, etc. But these manufacturing facilities, majority of them have heavy automation, and the automation in most cases is dependent on Wi-Fi communications. And so now we have manufacturing facilities, we have service centers around the world, right, that services these vehicles, just like your normal automobile service centers. They also are highly dependent in the service center on Wi-Fi communication, internet communication. So as we start to navigate around the life cycle of the EV world, from initial manufacturing to service centers to on the go communication between the EVs and the cloud, which can be a combination of Wi-Fi and cellular. Now you're getting an idea of how important Wi-Fi technology is to the EV market segment. And when it's important, it has to work, it has to be reliable. Any communication downtime can be highly detrimental and obviously having a direct impact on the business productivity, business revenue, customer satisfaction. And that's how we tie together what we're doing at Wyebot in terms of Wi-Fi automation with this world of EV.
You had mentioned a couple of examples there. I'll start with one that seems probably the least important, and then we'll move to what probably matters more than most other things. The Wi-Fi for the car sitting in the driveway connecting to your home network to receive an over-the-air update. I have issues with this myself. The router, I don't know if it's positioning or what, but connectivity isn't always there. Not that big of a deal because the over the air updates usually aren't something that's urgent and important that needs to be addressed right away. But if we get into manufacturing, as you were mentioning, manufacturing facilities have a schedule. They have a certain output that they need to achieve in order for the company to earn revenue and be profitable. So, down to any downtime is going to affect that dramatically. Where naturally, being somewhat of an assembly line, if you have an issue in one part, it's going to have a chain reaction and affect everything that comes after that. So, what is it exactly that you all are doing to really strengthen the Wi Fi network to make it a little bit more robust and resilient?
Yeah, and let's take that manufacturing example you ended on because you're right. I mean, this is core to the EV market segment, as we can all understand. And for the Wi-Fi, it's used in a variety of use cases within that manufacturing facility, right? Robots, that are built in, automation equipment, inventory management. As you mentioned, the vehicle itself, has Wi-Fi integrated in, so that has to go through a robust testing process. And in most cases, their manufacturers are loading the initial software and testing that, updates in the manufacturing process. So within a manufacturing facility, there's a lot of use cases for Wi-Fi. Now, what does Ybot do? We have a solution that consists of sensors, Wi-Fi sensors. And so they would go into the manufacturing facility based on the size, right, of the facility. You would use more than one, of course, but you would have a number of sensors around the manufacturing facility. And what the sensors are doing, Zach, is they're monitoring the entire Wi-Fi ecosystem, right? The airwaves that all this communication takes place, and does trending analysis, right? Trending analysis on the health of the Wi-Fi network. It also does automated quality testing on the Wi-Fi network, all this 24 by 7.
Okay.
And when there is an intermittent performance issue, which we hope there isn't, but as we discussed earlier, these environments are very complex, changing dramatically based on inventory, levels of inventory, etc., personal devices. And so when there's an performance issue, our software and AI technology with in combination with the sensors on premise will automatically detect what that issue is, notify IT proactively so they can take corrective action in most cases before it disrupts the business. So it's leveraging this whole system of automation, software, AI to eyes and ears, as we say, Zach, on the entire manufacturing facility. And IT can be anywhere in the world. They don't have to be in that facility. They may or may not be, but they may be in another whole location, which is very common. Their IT will get proactive alerts and tell them exactly when there's an action and what needs to take place.
I'm going to use an analogy to reframe that and see if I've got it and understand what you said. Where the sensors essentially, we could say it's similar to the way a car will run active diagnostics with various sensors, and if there's a problem with a specific component in a certain area, it will have a code. Now, naturally, most cars can't fix themselves or have IT logging in, almost immediately. But as I understand it, what you're saying is you have sensors that are going to be receiving and probably transmitting data over the Wi-Fi to test its signal strength, bandwidth, so on and so forth. That then, if there is a problem, it will actually be the raising the flag to go, "Hey, alert! There's an issue over here. Somebody, come take a look at this." Does the system that you've created have the ability to actually correct itself without human involvement, or does it require an IT person to log in and fix whatever the problem might be?
Yeah, that's an awesome question, and we get it a lot. Um, the good news is we could do self-healing, meaning we have the technology to connect into the infrastructure, equipment, et cetera, and do what you said, closed loop, self-healing. We do not do it today, and let me explain why. It's part of our strategy initiative of the company, but most enterprise organizations, especially complex manufacturing situations, they have maintenance windows, right? And they have a protocol, which makes sense, a very structured protocol on when to make changes and who authorizes the changes, right? Because even though we're educating them on something that's important for the business, they need to log all these changes. And so they really, even though they desire it in their hearts, they don't want us, to make just changes, at any point in time on the network infrastructure. So what we do is we have right in the dashboard, we have a user interface, and it'll tell them exactly what change needs to take place. Very prescriptive. And so now, based on their, you're right, it's not the final closed loop, but it gets them, we call it 90% of the way there, right? And so now, based on their maintenance windows, their protocols and processes for when to make changes, if it's an urgent one, then they usually have a process for that and they can go in and make a change right away. If it's one that's important but not disrupting the business at the moment, they can schedule it for a Saturday night when the manufacturing plant's offline. And so it allows them that flexibility to fit into their organizational processes and procedures for making network changes, and they have availability and logging of that information.
That makes a lot of sense naturally for people that want to have a little bit more structure and control over what is happening on their network and when, to that point. When I imagine a manufacturing facility, a lot of things are moving, right? You've got various metal objects that are being transported from place to place, robots that are moving. That changes the physical nature of the radio waves that are transmitted. Does that cause problems, or are there other various reasons why a Wi-Fi network might have issues?
So that's a very good example in manufacturing, right? When we talk about manufacturing EV vehicles and warehouses in general, just warehouses, you're absolutely right. The inventory levels, the types of inventory, metal, water versus, other devices, yes, can and often does have a noticeable impact on the Wi-Fi experience, which is what these vehicles are dependent on and the users on the manufacturing facility, right? So very, very important topic. The beauty of the Wyebot solution, right, is that we're monitoring all that,
Mhm.
right? We're monitoring what the RF map looks like. And as it's changing, we're keeping track of that. And we have all the historical data, Zach. So now IT organizations can look back over time as the vehicles, as the equipment's moving around the manufacturing facility, as inventory levels are changing, and they'll be able to see what that RF coverage and map looks like. And they'll be able to get alerted too if there's an issue, right, where you start to have poor coverage.
Mhm. So if something does go wrong, what have you seen from your customers, requests that they might make that are not necessarily something that they can fix on their own?
Yeah. So one of the more challenging ones in what I call high density environments are neighboring networks,
Mm,
Wi-Fi networks. Now, depending on the size of the location and where it's physically located, right? But Wi-Fi is a unlicensed shared technology. It's powerful, it's very effective, and it's, I think we all agree, become the primary on-ramp to the internet, right? And of course, when you're out in the mobile world, it's cellular, but it's an exciting technology. But at the same time, you could have neighbors, right? Some of these manufacturers are in, industrial parks, right? And so often what we'll see is a neighboring Wi-Fi network. Everything can be running fine for months, and all of a sudden the neighbor changes their Wi-Fi network. What I mean by that is they upgrade,
mhm.
their Wi-Fi network or add more access points because they got more demand. And so all of a sudden their changes, assuming it's, in proximity of your location, can have a direct impact on your network.
Is that because of the actual Wi-Fi signal itself? It's strong enough to basically the radio frequencies are interfering with the network that is what we're working with.
Absolutely. Just a little bit of technology, but Wi-Fi works on what they call channels, right? Similar to TV, radio, right? Channels, but
Mhm.
we work on channels. And if you have a neighbor that's, again, close to your facility and they're on the same channel as you are on and you're part of that manufacturing location, they're going to interfere with each other, right? Direct interference, depending on signal level, of course. And so you're right. Most Wi-Fi signals, if you don't have metal blocking them, kind of like an open air, it can go hundreds of feet, right? Hundreds of feet, even further. And so building near you, that Wi-Fi very likely can bleed in into your Wi-Fi environment just through the airspace. And yes, can have a direct impact on your Wi-Fi experience.
Okay, so naturally, the advantage of for an IT team would be the IT team that can identify that versus one that might not know exactly what's going on.
Correct. And as I mentioned, I used the word at the beginning, intermittent. This is very important, intermittent. And the reason why I say that is Wi-Fi technology, right, is mature. We talked about that. It
Mhm.
works well majority of the time. These networks, in most cases, they're not going down, right, where the whole network goes down. That's not what we're seeing. The IT organizations are very experienced. The technology from all the leading vendors is very mature. But what does happen often, right, are these intermittent issues. And you were asking, Zach, a good question. What causes those? And we covered a couple of the scenarios where you have inventory impacting the signals within the facility. You could have neighbors close by interfering with your network. And then you have personal devices, right? Where, yes, users are walking around and they turn on their smartphone and turn on a hotspot right on the smartphone. All these things can have an impact. And one of the big ones we see in manufacturing, are IoT devices, Internet of Things.
Mhm.
So within these manufacturing facilities, they could have their own sensors, right, for sensing different material. Like you said, within the vehicle, the sensors may not be Wi-Fi, but within the manufacturing facility, they could have Wi-Fi sensors, security cameras, um, you know,
Sure.
all the different devices that are used, robots, and these can have interoperability issues with the Wi-Fi network just because the technology is moving, at a very complex pace, moving along new standards. And so we see interoperability issues. And so our software has hundreds of these scenarios built in. And we used to do it. And what most companies do today is it's a lot of manual reactive, right? Manual reactive. So it might be only once a month, but someone in the manufacturing facility or the service center will open a ticket, pertaining to this business critical Wi-Fi network, and then someone in IT gets assigned, and they start digging into logs and data and trying to figure out what's going on. Well, with Wyebot, it's like having mini engineers, where you have your sensors because they're there 24 by 7 using the software, using automation. So we shifted from manual reactive to automated and proactive.
Mhm.
Automated and proactive. So that's how we're helping IT maintain business continuity, reducing the business downtime, as you mentioned, so that the revenue stream, the delivery, et cetera, can be flawless.
Yeah. And before anybody comments on this, that you're taking jobs away from IT people, I'm seeing that you're actually supporting their job, making their lives easier and reducing the amount of time that they have to try to figure out what's going wrong.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We work with, Fortune 500 companies all over the globe, including, like I said, EV companies. And no, this is a tremendous value add. We're not removing employees. IT knows this. Their workload is incredible these days, and our mission and goal at Ybot is to help, is to
Mhm.
help. We lived it for 15 years. My team's doing it every day, what IT's doing, so we know exactly what they're feeling, and it's getting more and more challenging with the security challenges, cloud computing, IoT devices, mobile connectivity, and so this is one area where we can dramatically help their lives. There's plenty to do, as they know, and so they can focus on other business critical initiatives within the organization.
What are the reasons why an organization wouldn't have a wired network for the majority of their devices and therefore bypass any issues with Wi-Fi?
Yeah, the number of business applications, Zach, and cloud computing, and the business value of having access to information 24 by 7, access to information. That's what creates differentiation for businesses, productivity improvements. So when we say access to information anytime, anywhere, in most cases that involves a mobile network, either cellular or Wi-Fi. So if you think of a manufacturing facility, I mean the physical vehicles, as we discussed, they're moving, right? They're not going to be connected. They're going down, the manufacturing facility, being built, being assembled, being tested. If you bring a vehicle into a service center, okay, you have movements going around. It's not fixed and stationary anymore, right? And so when you have movement, the productivity of information and efficiencies are dramatically increased when you're using mobile technology because you don't have the luxury of being able to keep it connected all the time, right? If you and I go into our office, and we're working on a laptop, we have the choice at that point to connect into wired or a docking station. And we could do that all day and everything, would be seamless. But in the new world that we live in terms of mobile connectivity, you're working in your home office, you go into the office, but you're in conference rooms on video collaboration calls. So same thing in the EV world when you're looking at robots, right, in a manufacturing facility, just the concept of a robot most of them are not stationary. I mean, you have machinery in the manufacturing facility that often is stationary and they could be wired in. But when you start looking at robots moving around and other types of automated equipment, those are going to be highly effective and more valuable in a mobile ecosystem, which is, some type of wireless communication.
Sure. I feel like we've covered the manufacturing side of things in terms of an example of where Ybot would, the technology that you have would be applied. I want to ask about EV charging and charging infrastructure because EV chargers, especially ones that are available for public use, often are connected with either Wi-Fi or cellular, or sometimes with a wired Ethernet connection when that's available. Do you all work in that space, keeping those networks up and running as efficiently as possible? We'll say.
Yeah. So today, Ybot does not uh, focus or work in the charging areas. But the good news is, we're expanding quickly here at Ybot, and whatever type of Wi-Fi technology is being used, we have two different solutions. We have our sensor-based solution, which we talked about for manufacturing, service centers, etc. And then we also have a partnership collaboration with Intel, where we built an agent, software agent for mobile compute devices, laptops, tablets, etc. And so as we expand our footprint in the industry, our agent has the ability to be in different devices,
Mhm.
right? Medical equipment, EV stations. So stay tuned. We're not working in that space today, but as you can imagine, anything that's Wi-Fi connected, whether it's a mobile compute device, an EV car, manufacturing facility, warehouse, we have the technology that can bring value for these IT organizations.
Sure. Yeah. The reason I brought that up, one uh, problem area or challenge, I would say, would be with underground parking garages. And a lot of the same challenges that a manufacturing facility would have with materials, metal, concrete, water pipes and things, but as well as things that are moving, in this case, vehicles. Connectivity, maybe a wired option isn't available for whatever reason. So I I would imagine that that is a place where there's a almost seamless application to what you're talking about to ensure that EV chargers, if they're 3 floors down underground, I'm thinking of like some places in Los Angeles as an example, that is quite the challenge to make sure that they continue to have connectivity to the overall network in order to work right. So, um, I recognize you said you're not working in that space potentially yet, but that is definitely something that I would want to put across your radar as a way that I can see what you're talking about being applied to that very specific situation and most likely solving a lot of the problems that, like you mentioned, are intermittent. If a car is driving by or a truck driving by and it interferes with the Wi-Fi signal, that doesn't happen 24/7. So I imagine that would be very difficult to diagnose from an IT perspective.
Very challenging, and you made a good analogy there. I mean, you've got the infrastructure of the parking garage that's there. You've got moving vehicles and other devices. Again, a lot of these situations are in environments where there's neighbors, right? I go back to that neighbor
Yeah.
channel, co-channel interference, what channels to use, right? So the beauty of our solution is not only are we doing what we call Wi-Fi automation, which is monitoring the entire environment, looking for those intermittent issues. But as I mentioned earlier, we also do synthetic testing, right? Testing on the Wi-Fi network and determining any back end issues with the infrastructure, right? So all that's proactive. Quality assurance testing, 24 by 7, end user experience metrics with the Wi-Fi automation. And in fact, we have a little bit tangent because we're talking EV here, but we have had some good conversations with gas pumps, right? So the non, the non-EV side of it, but gas pumps where, now they have Wi-Fi built in to the fuel pumps, right? For TV displays and
Hmm.
other, maintenance stuff. And so same concept, right? They need to make sure that the availability of that connection, the reliability, availability, is available all the time, and that's where we can help. So the concept makes sense. Haven't tapped into it yet, but sounds like we should touch base in the future, and we'll keep you posted.
Sure. Well, and with the world moving, as you mentioned, to this wireless and mobile connectivity, I imagine that the opportunities that lay ahead of you are fairly almost endless, where you have your pick, I guess, is of what industry and what direction you all wanted to work in. One thing that you mentioned briefly, but we haven't really discussed yet, is the security aspect of networks. Where, yes, obviously it's important that a network is going to work and be optimized and efficient, but security is going to be a huge concern, especially when you have moving things that could be hacked into, like robots, manufacturing facilities, or even vehicles themselves. What can you say that kind of touches on that aspect of it?
Yeah, when we talk to folks like yourself, just having networking experience myself for such a long time, two major initiatives right now in the networking sector, right? One is we call it assurance, right? This whole automation insurance, which we've already talked about on this podcast. The second is security, right? Those are both, and security arguably is even more important, right? In today's day and age, unfortunately. But so those two are major themes across CIOs, IT leaders around the globe. Like you said, they need the mobility, as we talked about, the productivity, the efficiency, right, of mobility, but they need to keep it secure at the same time because you're right, with all the IoT devices and robots and cameras and everything, those are opportunities for hackers or somebody, to get into the network and other disruptions. And so from a Wyebot's point of view, in the Wi-Fi space, we have signatures, we call them in our AI engine to detect security threats like denial of service attacks. And we have testing that can be done on the Wi-Fi network, some, basic testing that can be done around security. So we have weaved in for Wi-Fi security themes into it. We don't lead with security when it comes to, the internet and hackers coming in from the internet. There's companies that do that for a living very well. But within the Wi-Fi space, we have weaved in important security elements, unauthorized AP detection, et cetera, that could show up in your network and disrupt from a security point of view. So the good news is we've weaved that into our solution as well.
So I want to expand on that slightly. Um, if you are operating a network or providing the solutions for somebody to operate their own network, I guess is a better way of saying that, it's going to know what devices should be connected at various times. And certainly if on in the automotive manufacturing sector, I imagine that if a vehicle is traveling through an assembly line, either it itself would be Wi-Fi connected, or it might have an ID marker that's connected so that people will know exactly where that vehicle is at all times. If an unauthorized device, or even maybe an authorized device that gets connected unexpectedly, that's something that would pop up immediately and be unidentified by either your sensors or some other method.
So yeah, let me explain that a little bit further. There's two different, you mentioned the client side, right? So we have the infrastructure side of the network, which we refer to typically as access points.
Mhm.
And then we have the client side. Our solution is keeping track of all the connected clients all the time and the infrastructure, right? The access points. So we typically see the biggest challenge is on the access point side, where, like I said, it could be a hotspot. Someone turns on their phone. You don't want that in the network. A user brings in a home gateway router, right? They're trying to improve their office Wi-Fi, or they're just used to it, and they'll bring it into a facility. We talked about neighbors. So there's a lot of different elements where you can have a Wi-Fi access point infrastructure that's not desirable. And that could be a security threat. It may not be intended, but it could be a security threat. So all those, we've got automated alerts, like you said, going right into IT, letting them know what happens.
Sure.
On the client side, we're keeping track of all the connected clients, and we have reports that you can pull out of our system that shows who's connected, when they're connected, et cetera.
I'm curious to know if you can share a story of maybe one of the most extreme security situations that you've had to help correct. And obviously, we don't want to mention company names or anything. We want to protect anonymity. But if you just have an example that you can touch on.
Yeah, I'm gonna make 2 comments here because I wanna give you, a broader example. We were not involved, we, Wyebot,
Mhm.
but just to give an example of what's possible in the industry, um, a customer, they had deployed security cameras right around the network, obviously for security reasons.
Mhm.
But a number of these devices, as I mentioned earlier, we call them IoT devices, Internet of Things. Um, their security within their devices, meaning how they connect to the Wi-Fi, et cetera, isn't always up to the, most richest standards.
Sure.
And so a hacker was able to outside get into the security camera and then start flooding the network with all kinds of data, right? Overloading the network because they had access to all these cameras. And now they're just having the cameras send massive amounts of data, each one of them across the network, and it just stalled the entire network, right? Based on the volume of traffic. So now that was not a Ybot situation, but I just wanted to explain to you kind of a general one that I think your audience will appreciate, to show the importance of understanding any type of connected device that goes on the network. Really, a thorough analysis has to be done to understand its security level within its device itself, right? That's
Mhm.
where these folks will look for vulnerabilities. We typically, the ones that we have seen that have been at Ybot, more disruptive, have been on the infrastructure side, where an access point that's not supposed to be in the environment shows up in the environment, right? And that can create all kinds of challenges. So we've seen that often, a lot of different verticals, we've seen that. But a more serious one is where the whole network does come to a stall, and that was the security camera, someone getting into that.
I can imagine if I were supposed to be the employee in charge of network security at a company and something like that happened, I would feel a lot of panic in that
Mm.
situation, and I would imagine that I would wish very much for a solution of uh, something like what you all offer, where you have the ability to identify things. I would imagine before they become an actual security risk, where or something that's taken advantage of, where you can identify the risk immediately and say, hey, you might want to get that changed.
Yeah, exactly. So in a lot of cases, both Wi-Fi intermittent performance issues and security vulnerabilities, on the Wi-Fi, right? In a lot of those cases, that's exactly it. Because the Ybot solution is looking at behavior profiling, trending analysis, we're able to detect those before they cause disruption or big security issues on the network. And that's the whole goal of Ybot, is automation, so that we can be proactive, alert IT, they can take corrective action before it becomes a bigger issue. And that's where we're focused.
Sure. I want to take advantage of your expertise to actually ask a question that is potentially not related to what we've just talked about, but um, is something I'm curious about, and maybe you have some insight. As vehicles have more mobile connectivity built into them, there's talk about autonomous driving. And the situation I want to ask that if you have any insight on would be if vehicles have the ability to communicate with one another on the road. If you see something like that being either one, a possibility, or if so, coming soon ish.
Yeah. So, I mean, I do believe that autonomous vehicles are coming. I think we see massive investments from major corporations, right? And conceptually, I know there's a lot of opinions on this, but you're asking me, right? Conceptually, makes sense in the sense that, you know, there's a need for autonomous vehicles, right? Just for whatever in the industry. I mean,
Sure.
it is a benefit, let's put it that way.
Hmm.
And so a lot of these autonomous vehicles today are using cellular communication, right? And they're using cellular. Cellular is a license, most of it's licensed spectrum. So very well protected per se. Not that someone can't still try to create havoc, but different than the Wi-Fi, right?
Hmm.
Wi-Fi is used for, like you said, in some of these vehicles for uploads of information because you can transfer a lot more information faster in a local environment, right?
Sure.
And so you'll see a combination of both. Now, will we get to the point where they're communicating with each other? That I don't know yet. I mean, I don't it conceptually I understand it, but I don't know if there'll be a need for that or not in the sense that the intelligence that's being built into the vehicles, to observe the environment with all the cameras and sensors and everything is intended, I believe, to be self-contained, right? Where
Sure.
you don't need to have communications. Now, that's not to say, if you just take traffic reports, right? And you're looking at, your favorite app and you're changing your direction based on the information you're getting from your favorite mobile app, right? That these autonomous vehicles, as they start to come, more prevalent, will they gather information to help them be more efficient? Yes. Does that mean they're going to be communicating with each other on a regular basis? Yeah, I don't have enough insight into knowing when and if that's going to happen.
Sure. I knew that was a little bit of a stretch, but
That's okay.
but certainly in terms of wireless connectivity, I there's no comparison that you certainly have a lot more experience and knowledge and awareness of what's going on that part of the industry. So, Roger, we've covered a lot, and I want to thank you for taking the time to share a little bit about some of the behind the scenes when it comes to the EV world that everybody wants to talk about the vehicles or the charging and somewhat of the, let's call it the flashy stuff. But I appreciate having the opportunity to speak with you and kind of peel back the curtain a little bit to look at some of the things that I'm sure most people don't think about on a regular basis. I like to end each podcast episode asking two questions. The first one is related to vehicles. And most of the time, when somebody is in the EV space, it makes a little bit more sense that I'm asking, but I'm a creature of habit. So I'm going to ask anyway. What do you drive?
What do I drive?
Yes.
I drive a Subaru.
Okay. Very good.
So I live I live in a mountain area. This is gonna sound odd. I live in Massachusetts, so we're not a mountain area, but there is, Mount Wachusett, which is in the center of the state, and we live in that area. So my wife and I've been there for 30 years, but the traveling around that requires all-wheel drive.
Sure.
And at the time we moved there were very few. I know it's changed dramatically, but there were very few all-wheel drive vehicles, family type oriented
Hmm.
vehicles, and so that got us into the Subaru family, and we've stayed with it ever since.
Sure. Well, I would say Subaru's market is the Northeast, New England. Like, there are a lot of them. So that makes a lot of sense. So this last question is a play on the word drive. where instead of what do you drive, what drives you? When you wake up in the morning, and what do you feel is your purpose for continuing the either the work you're doing, or it could be for personal side of things as well?
Yeah, I get excited about driving innovation to help organizations. That's just what I like to do every day, building innovative, technology like we've done with our automation so that we can help these IT organizations that are very challenged right now. And it's getting more, it has become more challenging post COVID, right? I know it's been a few years now, but that created a lot more of a dynamic environment, more teleworkers, mobile workers, which IT organizations still have to support. And so for us, myself, what I get excited about every day is keep pushing that innovation, helping companies. You're right, we do work in the EV space, but you mentioned a very good comment earlier. I mean, the world is our oyster, like it's untapped. We're on cruise ships over an island, right? We're in education institutions all over the world and hospitals, right? So we're really helping organizations with a very, very challenging task. And that's what I enjoy doing, building companies, building teams, innovating to help other companies.
That's great. It sounds like through innovation, the end result is making human lives easier and potentially a lot less stressful, which has numerous benefits, both as an individual, but also on the community, and I would argue worldwide level.
Yeah, I completely agree. And when you're dealing from everything from manufacturers, to hospitals with patient monitoring equipment, education classrooms where you have 20 students in a classroom, all doing a e-learning session, right? And so these are really important initiatives around the world right now. And, we can bring tremendous value, which we're doing in the Wi-Fi automation space.
Excellent. Well, Roger Sands, I want to thank you very much for taking the time to share with us something that I honestly haven't thought about this much, I think, in my entire life. So I appreciate that. And it's been a pleasure having you on the podcast.
Thanks, Zach. I appreciate it.
If you've enjoyed this podcast and would like to hear more, please subscribe to wherever you like to watch or listen to your favorite podcasts. And if you're looking to stay plugged into the EV community, head over to ev-resource.com for the very best educational resources, community connections, EV reviews, and a whole lot more. The EV Resource Podcast is a production of EV Resource and is supported by viewers and listeners just like you. Members of the EV Resource Patreon family are, at the Director tier, Rajeev, Narayan, and Andy Cooper; at the Executive Producer tier, Christopher Lawrence. If you're interested in ad-free episodes of the podcast, EV Resource merchandise, support recognition, and more, head over to patreon.com/EVResource. If you have any feedback, please email hello@ev-resource.com and put podcast feedback in the subject line. I've been your host, Zach Hurst. Thank you so much for watching and listening, and we'll catch you next time.